What's up, guys? My name's Brandon and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to discuss even more new changes in iOS 18.3 and some really bad news about iOS 18.4. We're going to talk about what to expect from Apple's product launch next week, a big change coming to your Apple account, a crazy AirTag story, and more. And as always, if you want to stay updated with everything going on in the world of Apple, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Next week should be exciting. Okay, so let's start by talking about the new software update that came out this week, which was iOS 18.3.1. Yes, a double point update, which means, of course, it was not going to be a big update from the start, but we did see a pretty unique and a pretty interesting security patch with this update. So I did make a full video if you want to see that. If you missed it, it will be linked below. But really, the main thing you need to know is that it had this fix right here, this security patch, which says a physical attack may disable USB restricted mode on a locked device, and Apple is aware of a report that this issue may have been exploited in an extremely sophisticated attack against specific targeted individuals. So that was the issue, that was the vulnerability, which of course has been patched with iOS 18.3.1. Now I think that most people are not going to be vulnerable to this whatsoever because again, it was targeted at select individuals, most likely those in government. So I would not be too worried about this, but it's still good to go ahead and stay updated just to keep your device as secure as possible regardless. But as far as anything else in 18.3.1, really not a lot going on. So we will discuss the performance and the battery life along with what your guys' experience has been with 18.3.1 here in a moment. But first, we need to talk about the bad news about iOS 18.4 because on Friday, Mark Gurman dropped a bombshell basically saying that iOS 18.4 might not be as big of an update as we thought because the Siri features might actually be delayed until iOS 18.5. So this report says that Apple's long-promised AI overhaul for the Siri digital assistant is facing last-minute engineering and software bugs threatening to postpone or limit its release. And he follows that up by saying that Apple has been planning to introduce the technology as part of its iOS 18.4 update, but now Apple is considering delaying or limiting at least some of the overhaul until iOS 18.5, which will be released as early as May. So at this point, it seems like Apple is just delaying Apple Intelligence features one after another. It just seems like an endless cycle of, Apple Intelligence delays, which is quite frustrating, especially if you're somebody who bought an iPhone 16 specifically for Apple Intelligence. I would feel kind of robbed. I'd feel kind of conned at this point because Apple just keeps delaying these Apple Intelligence features, even though you were promised them back in September and, the months after that. And we still may not even get those in beta. Now, let me just say that I would expect to see some of the new Siri features in iOS 18.4 beta. I don't think that Gurman is saying here that every single one of them is going to be delayed. Some of them obviously will be, but I do still think we're going to see at least something new with Siri in iOS 18.4. So yes, very disappointing, very frustrating, but at the same time, I don't think that all is lost. I still think we're going to see something in 18.4. Maybe that's just wishful thinking on my end, but I cannot imagine that Apple doesn't ship at least something related to Siri and Apple Intelligence with 18.4. And even though that is bad news, at least the delay is until 18.5, not iOS 19 or iOS 19.4 next year. So, at least that is a positive for this if you want to try to spin it positively. Like, let me be clear, I don't think this is a great thing. It's not a great look for Apple, but at least it's only going to be delayed for a short amount of time instead of, next year for 19.4. But let's not forget, we're still going to see other features in iOS 18.4 as well, such as the new emoji. You're going to see Apple Intelligence come to other countries as well. And of course, there are going to be several other features and changes as well, as the 0.4 updates are generally pretty large updates, one of the largest updates every year. And we'll talk about when you can expect that first beta for 18.4 here in a moment. But let's talk about some other news here. So let's start by talking about if you go into the Maps application and you look near Florida, you will see that we have a new ocean that just appeared out of nowhere called the Gulf of America. Yes, it's no longer called Gulf of Mexico. It is called Gulf of America. That was one of Trump's orders when he came into office, was to rename Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. So you'll see right below New Orleans now to the west of Florida, we have Gulf of America America in the Apple Maps application. So what do you guys think of that name change? Do you think it was necessary? Is it going to take some time to get used to? I mean, just what are your thoughts overall? I don't really have an opinion personally, but what are your thoughts on the new Gulf of America? We also saw this week that Apple Maps cycling directions have expanded to the UK and Ireland. So if you're somebody who does cycling and you live in the UK or Ireland, you will now have those cycling directions, which is nice. Now, if you guys remember a couple weeks back, we saw that T-Mobile announced that StarLink is going to be coming to the carrier, and you will be able to have StarLink service on your iPhone, which means that if you're somewhere where you don't have signal, you will be able to use StarLink, the satellites up in the sky, to get signal, even if you're not in an emergency situation, which is going to be a game changer for a lot of people. It's going to be a big deal for a lot of people. Now, there's been a lot of misinformation out there about how, Elon Musk and how Starlink's going to see all your information on your phone. That's not how that works. Please don't listen to that fake news. None of that is true, but that's not the story here. The story here is that iPhone users can now sign up to try Starlink for free until July. So this is through T-Mobile, and you can see they have this announcement right here telling you about the Starlink beta. So if you're somebody who's interested in this service and you maybe live in a remote area, or maybe you're a first responder, you might want to consider taking advantage of this so you can see how it works. Also this week, we saw the Apple Sports application get an update for NASCAR. So for the Daytona 500, you can see that we have Daytona 500 race coverage and leaderboard updates, along with spring training for the MLB. So if you're into NASCAR, or if you really follow the MLB, those are both now available in the Apple Sports application, which has grown to be one of my favorite first-party applications from Apple for sure. Also this week, we saw Apple TV Plus come to Android finally. So this has always been available on TVs and certain other devices, but it was not available on Android phones, tablets, or foldables. But now this week, Apple did officially launch it on Android. So that's good news. It's always good to know that more eyes will be on Severance, the best show on Apple TV Plus. Also this week, we saw a pretty big change come to Apple accounts when it comes to media that you have downloaded on your device. If you've used two separate, Apple accounts to download different media on your device, you now have a way to consolidate that information and without having any issues. So this is something that we've been wanting for a very long time. So basically, apps, music, books, TV shows, movies, whatever, any of those that have been purchased on a secondary account can now be migrated to a main account. Now, Apple does say that in order to migrate the purchases, the primary email address and all the information for both accounts is required. So neither account should be shared, and also two-factor authentication must be turned on for both accounts. But this is good because if you had two different emails, if you downloaded something on one Apple account and then another application on another account, or a movie, or whatever the case may be, you'll no longer have to manage both those accounts or remember the password for both those accounts. You can kind of merge them into one, which is great. Now, going back to iOS 18.3.1 here, as far as the performance and the battery life goes, performance is pretty good. I mean, like I said before, I'm not going to spend too much time here. Performance and battery life, let me just tell you right now, are exactly the same as iOS 18.3, which is exactly what I was suspecting when I made that video. Usually double point updates don't change anything related to performance or battery life. It's very rare. If they do, it's possible, but it's just very rare. But I did run a fresh score here for Geekbench. You can see the score there compared to the original run. And as far as battery life goes, again, battery life pretty much exactly the same. And after reading your guys' comments on the 18.3.1 video, it seems like all of you, at least most of you, are having the same experience as well. But again, that was a small update. All eyes are going to be on iOS 18.4 beta 1, even though, like we said earlier in the video, it's probably not going to be as dramatic, as massive of an update as it was originally supposed to be. Now, next week is when I would expect to see iOS 18.4 beta 1. And if you guys remember, all the way back in January, I said that February 18th is when we could see iOS 18.4 beta 1. I said that's the latest we could see it is February 18th. So, it looks like that's actually going to end up being the case because, of course, Monday is a holiday. So we're probably going to see 18.4 beta 1 on Tuesday, the 18th. Now, with that being said, we are seeing a product launch on the 19th. So now I do think that it's possible to see 18.4 beta 1 on Wednesday the 19th as well after the event. And I say event, but it's probably not going to be an event. It's probably just going to be Apple unveiling the new iPhone SE or iPhone 16e. So regardless, I do think that we'll see 18.4 beta 1 on either the 18th or the 19th. And we should go probably 2 weeks between betas after that. So I would not expect beta 2 until March, the beginning of March March, most likely. And then of course the final release is going to come at some point in April. All right, so now let's move on to the latest Apple news. And let's start with the big news for next week. We are getting our first official Apple product launch of 2025. And we're anticipating that this is going to be the new iPhone SE4 or the iPhone 16e. Yes, that name is still possible because if you see here, Tim Cook actually is the one who broke this news. He posted this over on X. He announced, "Get ready to meet the newest member of the family Wednesday, February 19th," with this, really interesting animation here, this really cool graphic, one of my favorite Apple graphics actually, little teasers here. And a lot of people were saying, this circle, it looks like an AirTag, looks like we're going to see a new AirTag. It's possible we could see the next generation AirTag, but I think this is more so implying that we're going to see, that single firing 48 megapixel camera lens on the iPhone SE or 16e. Now I'm saying 16e here because if you look again at the wording used, Apple is very specific about the wording they use in their marketing. He says the newest member of the family. Now, yes, the SE technically still exists, but the newest member of the family, to me, I don't know, for some reason that implies 16e to me. For some reason, I don't know why, but it just tells me that 16e is still a possibility of a name. Now, it could still be called the SE. Who knows at this point? Nobody really knows until Apple announces it, but it just kind of, leads us to believe that 16e is at least still a possibility out there. And I think this iPhone SE is going to sell very well, actually. Like, this is going to have the iPhone 14 style design. It's going to have Apple Intelligence, 8 gigs of RAM, 48 megapixel camera lens. It's going to have a notch, unfortunately, but still, I just think it's going to be a solid device, especially if it does, in fact, stay under that $500 price point. Now, the way that Tim Cook worded this makes me think that we're only going to see one product here, like it's just a product launch, basically just like a press release and maybe a video on YouTube about the new iPhone SE. It doesn't seem like it's going to be like a mini event. It was not worded that way, but if that were to happen, if that were to be the case, what other products could we see? Well, I would say the iPad, which would be the iPad 11th generation, the base model, a new iPad Air, and potentially even a new MacBook Air. Now, that's only if we don't get an event next month. That's only if we don't see anything in March or April from Apple, which we've heard that Apple might actually host a mini, virtual event in March for the MacBook and maybe something else. So we'll have to wait and see. We could also see the Home Hub, the new Home Hub. We could see that announced and maybe not released until later in the year. Who knows at this point, but next week should be exciting. And the more cryptic and confusing it is, honestly, the better. It keeps us on our toes and keeps us guessing. So I like it. Stay tuned on Wednesday for that big announcement. Now, we also got some pretty interesting news this week about something else Apple is working on for 2025, and that is a 27-inch mini LED studio display. So Ross Young said this today, and he says that this could come as late as later this year. So if late 2025 is the latest that this new studio display can come, that means that we should be seeing this in the first half of 2025. So it's not for sure, but it does seem like we are going to see this at some point before Q4, which is going to be amazing. This also could have a 120 hertz display if it does have Thunderbolt 5 ports, but that at this point is unknown. But still, I'm very interested in a mini LED version since, right now the studio display uses a 5K LED panel. So this would be a nice solid upgrade even over the previous studio display, which I have 2 of. But here's the really interesting part, because Ross Young is usually very accurate and very, right with his predictions when it comes to display technology and displays in general. And he said that late 2025 is the latest that we'll see the new studio display, whereas Mark Gurman says we're not going to see it until 2026. So we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to look back on this video and see who was right. But one thing that's more likely to come in 2026 is the OLED MacBook Pro, because we're now hearing from the elect that Apple is working on a new, slimmer design that's going to have an OLED display on the MacBook Pro. And this OLED screen is said to be produced by Samsung. So it'll be pretty interesting to see an OLED MacBook Pro and really just how big of a difference that actually makes. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a man was visiting New York City, and after getting off of his flight, he went to grab some pizza at a nearby pizza shop in Queens. And since he still had his suitcase with him, he was clearly being targeted because right as he got out of his vehicle to walk to the pizza joint, he was jumped by several men who popped out of a black SUV. After the men pushed the 50-year-old to the ground and beat him up, they stole his fully loaded silver suitcase, which police say contained more than $500,000 worth of jewels inside. They took off in the black SUV, but little did they know that suitcase had an AirTag inside. And I would hope so. Carrying around $500,000 in your suitcase is insane. The least you could do is put a little AirTag in there. Anyways, the man was able to quickly give police the location, and they tracked the thieves down swiftly. And these thieves were a 22 and 23-year-old. They were arrested and charged with criminal possession of stolen property, reckless endangerment, unlawful fleeing, and more. However, NYPD said that several individuals of interest in connection to the robbery are still at large because, yeah, this seemed premeditated and planned. You know, they must have known what was in that luggage ever since he left the airport. Regardless, without that AirTag, this guy would have lost $500,000 worth of jewels, which is insane to even just go to a pizza joint with that in your hands. But anyways, that's it for the AirTag story this week. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. If you did, if you enjoyed this video overall, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the exciting stuff coming next week in the world of Apple, and of course Apple Weekly to top off the weekend next weekend. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.